Hello, my name is Peter Larson. If you're here to hear about our amazing trip to Israel, Palestine that I took with Michael Buchart and Philip Sherwood at the end of October, beginning of November, you're at the right spot. Next slide. So what we're going to do today is a brief outline. Here is the welcome. Then I'm going to ask Michael Buchart to tell us a bit about where we went. Philip will talk about what our objectives were. And then the organization of the webinar, where we decided to divide up responsibilities, is that Philip is going to talk a bit about the tensions we saw and experienced in the West Bank. Then Michael's going to follow up with the meetings we had in Ramallah. He'll tell you about some of our learnings from there. That's a picture from one of our meetings there with the BNC and the National Organizing Committee of the BDS movement in Ramallah. And then at the end, I will talk about the whole question of apartheid inside Israel, and then we'll have a question and answer period and adjourn. But first of all, I want to, we can stop sharing the screen. I want to introduce my two fellow travelers, Philip Sherwood. Philip lives in Vancouver. He's from on the National Coordinating Committee of UNJPI, the United Network for Justice and Peace in Palestine and Israel. And my other collaborator, Michael Buchart. Michael is a vice president of CJPME, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. And we had a terrific time going around, busing it or taking, renting a vehicle, staying in people's houses. It was a great trip. So you can go back on the share screen if you wouldn't mind, please. And we'll do the next slide. Just as I get into that, I realized I should have mentioned two other things. The chat function is open, so please feel free to use the chat function anytime you want. Put comments on. Where we will not be directly monitoring the chat, so other people may or may not be looking at it, but it's free to use for everybody. We will be monitoring the question and answers. So if you have questions, and frankly, if you have challenges, if you disagree, we're more interested in questions where you don't agree with us than by people saying, yes, they agree with us a lot. So please use either or the chat function to make comments or the question and answer function to raise questions. Now, the context that we went is that today there is quite a high level of tension in the area. Settlers are becoming more violent and aggressive. The whole area from the river to the sea, from what is now called Israel or Israel on the West Bank, there are actually equal numbers of Jews and non-Jews, but the Jews have a privileged status in that. In the 3 years since we have last been there, I was there 3 years ago, another 1,000 Palestinian structures have been demolished. There were, of course, 2 deadly bombing campaigns against Gaza, and there have been those 3 significant reports by international human rights organizations claiming that Israel is practicing apartheid from the river to the sea. So we wanted to investigate that a bit. There were also elections were supposed to have been held last spring in Palestine. They didn't take place. And Israel has also banned 7 Palestinian organizations as terrorist organizations. So it gives you some of the elements of the tensions that we're dealing with. But I'm going to ask Michael to tell us all where we went. Michael?
Thanks, Peter. Happy to be part of this webinar to talk about the trip we had and reflect on some of those experiences. Apologies if I have a bit of a cold and my voice goes out, please bear with me. But yeah, I think at this point, I would like to go through a couple of the places on our itinerary to orient the conversation geographically. And so on this map, this isn't every single place we've been, but this is most of the places. In green, the numbers are related to places in the occupied Palestinian territories that we visited. And then in red, those are places in Israel or Palestinian communities, usually within Israel, in territory we often refer to as 48 Palestine. So I'll walk through a few of these. We spent time in East Jerusalem, near the Old City, and we visited the Old City as well as Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood that is facing significant threats of mass expulsion. The Palestinians were being pushed out to be replaced with Israeli settlers as part of this ongoing process of, demographic change in the city. We also went up to Ramallah, which is where a lot of the international NGOs are located, as well as Palestinian authority ministries, for a number of meetings, and I'll talk about some of those later. We also, some of us, I guess we all went to Jenin in the north, and some of us went to Nablus and Hebron as well. I went to Bethlehem. So these are some major West Bank cities as well. But a lot of our time, as we'll talk about, was spent in 48 Palestine, learning from Palestinians within Israel itself. And so some of the places we went included Kufr Qasim, which is number 8 there, right on the border of the West Bank, in this zone known as the Triangle, of a number of Palestinian communities within Israel. Every year on October 29th, there is a demonstration to commemorate a massacre in 1956 when I want to say 49 Palestinian men, women, and children were killed by Israeli forces. They were returning from a curfew that had been imposed in their absence and they didn't know about. And Israelis responded to that by shooting people. And so every single year on the 29th, they commemorate this with a demonstration. And we were there to be a part of that, to participate in that. We also spent a significant amount of time in al-Faham, which is number 9 on the map, which is also in the triangle, but more at the northern part, very much up against the apartheid wall, which separates it from the West Bank. It is a Palestinian city in Israel. It feels like you're in the West Bank, the way the city is built, because of various forms of discrimination, lack of services, and that sort of thing. You might as well be in Jenin in some ways. But we stayed with a wonderful family there and used that as a base for touring around the area, going to Haifa, which is called a mixed city. We went to Nazareth, which is one of the largest Palestinian cities that remained in Israel after 1948, and to some depopulated Palestinian villages in the area and along the coast. Ein Hod, we went to Tantura, where there was a massacre, and we visited Lajun as well, where we saw the ruins of old buildings in this field where the Palestinians, they still have ownership of the land, but they're not allowed to do anything with it because it had been declared a closed military zone. So learning about forms of dispossession that go back to 1948, many of them, the legacies of that. We also went down to Jaffa in Tel Aviv to learn about how gentrification was taking place as a political weapon against Palestinians to push them out of these neighborhoods and to Judaize some key neighborhoods near the old city. We also went down to Beersheba in the Nakab, or commonly known as the Negev Desert. And from there, we visited a number of unrecognized Bedouin communities that face significant pressure as Israel is trying to push them out of these and put them into townships like Rahat, which is nearby, that we went through, which is a township essentially that was created to relocate Bedouin and is now, they say, the largest non-Jewish city in Israel now. On nearby, we stopped at Al Araqib, which is a Palestinian village, very tiny. It has been demolished over 200 times by Israel, and I think even just in the last couple of days, it was demolished once again. I saw, so under significant pressure once again to meet with the people who are there, who are refusing to be forced from their homes, and witnessing how a lot of this sort of the house demolitions and other processes that we're quite familiar with in the West Bank are also happening against non-Jewish communities, Palestinian communities in Israel itself, showing some of the continuity between these processes. We also had a chance to stop by Sderot near the Gaza barrier, as well as the Eretz crossing. We weren't allowed entrance into Gaza, but we were able to see it from this very, there's this very morbid viewing site in Sderot where they've created a viewing area that overlooks Gaza. Is very chilling, kind of a chilling experience, to be honest. And maybe we can talk about more a bit later, but I think I've given sort of a key overview of the main destinations that we went and some of the highlights of those. We'll dig into this in more detail later in the webinar, but maybe I'll pass it back to Peter.
Thanks, Michael. And as people can appreciate, in 2.5 weeks, we did a lot of traveling, a lot of meeting, a lot of discussion. It was a very packed agenda. But Philip, maybe you can remind people what we were there for, what we're trying to do.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had several objectives that we identified before we left. And the first was to reestablish links with friends and contacts in Israel and Palestine. And I guess at this point, I'd like to offer a big thank you to Peter, because he largely organized all this trip. And as many of you might know, he's been taking groups to the region for about a decade. And during this time, he's made many contacts and close friends in the region. And Michael and I really benefited from their hospitality experience and expertise. So, Peter deserves a lot of credit for the success of this trip. And so just like to say a big thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Another one of our objectives was to better understand what's changed in Israel and Palestine in recent years. Peter mentioned he'd been there in 2019. For me, I hadn't been there since 2014, and I think Michael's 2016. And then we wanted to learn more about the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Peter's touched on this already in light of the 3 recent reports. Those are reports from Amnesty International, B'Tselem, and Human Rights Watch, that apartheid is not only being practiced in the West Bank, but also in Israel proper. And then we thought this would be a good opportunity for our 3 organizations to strengthen ties. And we also found that it was effective in meeting people, because when we explained that we were representing different organizations, I think that really helped us meet people and people take the time for us. So that was a strength of our trip. And then we also wanted to get some kind of input on as to how we could come back to Canada and do a better job of advocating for human rights for Palestinians. What did they see would be helpful from their end? We also had an additional sort of soft objective, was to try and get a sense of how Palestinians envisioned their future. What kind of society or state were they working towards in the region between the river and the sea? And what kind of world do they want for their children, grandchildren, and beyond? So that was something we brought up in conversations and had some fascinating discussions. So in this image, in the 2 images you see on this page, here at the bottom, we're having dinner with Haneen Zoabi in Nazareth. And Ms. Zoabi is a former member of the Knesset, Israel's parliament. And she's a longtime champion for the rights of Palestinians. So back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Philip. Although I'm going to flip it back to you in a second, because we're now going to go into 3 different presentations. Philip's going to talk a bit about the West Bank, then Michael's going to talk about Ramallah. And of course, Ramallah is in the West Bank, but in Ramallah, we're learning from organizations rather than visiting the spots, as it were. And then afterwards, I'll talk about 48 Palestine. But Philip, back to you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about our time in the West Bank and sort of what we came away from it. And here are some of our sort of key thoughts, impressions. I guess the biggest thing is that the military and settler violence has increased dramatically this year. The rate of Palestinian deaths goes up every day. A few days ago, it was about 150 Palestinians who've been killed this year, including 30 children. Amongst the Israelis, the death toll is about 30. Armed resistance is on the rise, independent. It's especially by young men who shun political affiliation. So that's something that was very different from when I last visited, when the emphasis was much more on nonviolent resistance. And another interesting point is that we discovered that the armed resistance enjoys popular support, especially in the northern West Bank, amongst what you might call mainstream Palestinians. I think a lot of people already know the Palestinian Authority has little credibility or influence with most Palestinians, especially in the northern West Bank. And nowhere did we see any support for a two-state solution. That is just sort of a fantasy that exists outside the West Bank in Western minds.
Can I make a comment on that one, Philip?
Yeah.
I just want to frame. I totally agree with what you've just said there, but people should also be aware of the fact that we are aware of the fact that we talked to maybe 30 or 40 people. The people we talked to were educated people, activists, and so on. We're not really. We're telling you what they told us, but we're not really in a position to actually measure popular support or the amount of credibility. I believe those statements are true, but they're based on our discussions with a relatively narrow band of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's anecdotal, but we were trying to get a sense of the mood, as it were. Generally speaking, as one Palestinian put it, the Israeli settler colonial project remains in full conquest mode in the West Bank. The settlers and soldiers act with increasing impunity. And when it comes to security, areas A, B, and C are largely no longer relevant as soldiers and settlers go where they want. And one Palestinian observed, he said, only foreigners ask about areas A, B, and C. And so the sense we got is that when it comes to security, the West Bank is increasingly becoming a giant area C.
Area C meaning?
Meaning under direct Israeli control, complete Israeli control. That's sort of a leftover from the Oslo Accords. So there, we saw a widespread defiance and a will to resist, but there's also a sense of despair. They're sort of mixed together. And almost every day a Palestinian is killed by soldiers or settlers. And often the victims are innocent bystanders simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the collective trauma is inevitably huge. So people are bearing this burden. They're resisting and they want to resist, but it's costing an awful lot. Also in the West Bank, we detected a certain amount that the Unity Intifada of May 2021 seems to have strengthened their resolve to resist as they feel more connected with their compatriots in East Jerusalem, Israel, and Gaza. So there's a sense of that everybody's sort of in this together. Those are the sort of key findings. Now I'd like to talk about the three main cities that we visited, that some of us visited. And so we could do the next slide. And next slide, thank you. So I'm going to start in Jenin in the north, and we spent a day there, as Michael mentioned. We were the guests of the director of the Jenin Creative Cultural Center. He's also a mid-level PA functionary. And Jenin, especially the refugee camp, which is home to 12,000 people, has long been a center of popular and armed resistance to the occupation. During the last several months, there's been a resurgence of armed resistance, mainly by young men who are unaffiliated with any political factions. And in Jenin, they're known as the Jenin Brigade. And for them, the Second Intifada is largely history. They see the Palestinian Authority and political parties as corrupt and ineffective. The Israelis is taking more and more of their land, and efforts of nonviolent resistance as useless. And so they've resorted to armed resistance, not because they think they can beat the Israelis, but to show they'll never give up the struggle. Their sporadic attacks on soldiers and settlers have resulted in many recent incursions by large numbers of IDF soldiers into the camp, either to assassinate or arrest militants. These raids have been met with fierce resistance. And so far this year, about 54 Palestinians have been killed in Jenin, many of them non-combatants. It was during one of these raids in May that Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by an Israeli sniper. So that's a little background. After brunch at the home of the director, and that was just one of the many instances of the incredible Palestinian hospitality that we experienced during our trip, he took us to the cultural center where we met a group of teen girl soccer players. The ensuing conversation provided fascinating but sobering insights into their lives. After a walk around Jenin with the director, we rejoined the girls at the soccer field before leaving. So our day there left us with several impressions. So many Palestinians are burdened with an enormous amount of trauma due to the horrors that they've witnessed. At one point, the director looked out of his living room windows and described just a few of the killings and harassments that had happened in his line of sight. He also spoke of the regular humiliation he experienced at the Israeli checkpoints, sometimes being detained 6 hours just because he was a member of the PA. Many of the girls, the soccer team, some of whom lived in the refugee camps, knew friends or relatives who had been killed, wounded, or imprisoned by the Israelis. The raids, the shootings, and the murders are a regular part of their lives, and they live in fear of the soldiers whose hate of them they clearly recognize. At one point, we asked the girls what they would want girls their age in Canada to know about them in Palestine. This resulted in nonstop replies for 10 minutes. And here are a few excerpts. Quote, "We want freedom to move around our country without Israeli checkpoints. We want peace. We don't want to live in fear. We have no security and safety in our homes. We want to live as you live and get an education. We want to have the security that other children have. We want an end to the racism of the Israelis." As for the future, they said they could live in a state with Jews, but Zionism has to end. They ended with a note of defiance. Quote, "We are only asking for what everyone else has. We will not surrender." So next slide. After our delegation officially ended, Peter and I spent one night in a refugee camp south of Jenin before traveling to Nablus, where we stayed in the guest house of the Yafa Cultural Center in Balata refugee camp. The camp and the city had been on high alert due to several massive IDF incursions into the heart of the old city and the camp. The most recent had taken place 3 days before our arrival. These had resulted in the assassinations and arrests of members of the Lion's Den militant group. The Israelis had also sealed the city off for 2 weeks. However, our hosts at the camp had assured us that we could visit safely, and so we did. So some of our findings from those few days. Like Jenin, Nablus is a center of independent armed resistance. The militants are known as the Lion's Den and spurn any affiliation with established political factions such as Fatah and the PLO. They operate independently and simply offer their allegiance to Palestine. A broad sector of the Palestinian public embraces the Lion's Den resistance. The militants communicate with the public directly through social media accounts such as Telegram, where they have 240,000 followers. Palestinians have overwhelmingly responded to the Lion's Den appeal for general strikes and, quote, nights of disruption. Mainstream, middle-aged Palestinians we encountered spoke eloquently of their support for the resistance. The most popular song on Palestinian radio, they say, is titled, "We Are Not Afraid." The Lion's Den also draws huge support from youth across the West Bank. One militant explained in a recent media piece, quote, "We are under occupation, and this occupation is killing us every day. We wake up every day to news of more martyrs, more settler attacks, and more of our homeland being stolen. When we fight, we are demanding our dignity, something our own government has failed to do for 30 years. The massive Israeli raids into the heart of Nablus are the worst since the Second Intifada. Israel began mounting these highly organized incursions as part of Operation Breaking the Wave, their attempt to destroy the resistance. They succeed in the sense that they fly under the radar of international scrutiny and so avoid criticism. A day or so before a raid, Israeli special forces disguised as civilians infiltrate the area and take up sniper positions in abandoned buildings. Military drones circle overhead, and when the raids begin, anyone who resists or challenges the soldiers is shot. The militants do fight back, but they're inevitably outgunned. Collective punishment remains an integral part of the Israeli strategy. Prior to our arrival, the military had sealed the city off for 2 weeks. The hope was to lessen popular support for the Lion's Den, but by all accounts, this failed. The result of all this is a high level of tension, both in the city and the camp. The noise of the ever-present drones keeps many people awake at night. Each evening, young men gather at the entry of the camp on the lookout for Israeli infiltrators. They scrutinize and stop any passing vehicles that seem suspicious. No one knows when or where the next raid will be. So the next slide. So our plans to visit Hebron and Masefer Yatta didn't work out. And so after the delegation ended, I went to Hebron on my own for 2 days. My first visit there in 2012 had brought the brutality of the occupation and the Zionist project into sharp focus, and I returned in 2014 for 10 days. Earlier on this trip, a Palestinian human rights lawyer had told us, if you want to see the future of Jerusalem, go to Hebron. I was welcomed by expressions of hopelessness. My host was a young man who runs a guest house at H2, just outside the closed zone that includes the settlements. Right away, he painted a stark picture of how horrible life was for the residents and how he despaired for a future devoid of hope. And as I explored H2 the next day, the changes I saw seemed to support his outlook. Freedom of movement, always a challenge in H2, is much more restricted. The checkpoints are more numerous, larger, and more imposing. In 90 minutes, I passed through at least a dozen. If a Palestinian man living near the guest house wanted to walk to the Ibrahimi Mosque to pray a distance of about 500 meters, he would have to pass through 4 checkpoints. Soldiers are everywhere, mainly drawn from the combat brigades, and they don't hesitate to challenge an international like me as I wandered around. Palestinians, of course, can't wander around much of H2. The close relationship between the settlers and the soldiers was apparent. More and more soldiers are religious Zionists and openly identify with the extremist worldviews of the settlers in Hebron. The settlers have expanded their presence in the city and are increasingly emboldened. While I was there, preparations were underway for Sarah's Day, a large religious festival. Huge tents covering whole city blocks were being erected. 2 days after I left, tens of thousands of settlers from all over the West Bank descended on the city, and many ran amok, terrorizing Palestinians in their homes and shops while soldiers stood by. The nature of Palestinian resistance in Hebron is not as overt as in other parts of the West Bank, probably due in part to the massive Israeli military presence there and the tight control on physical movement. More than ever, I appreciated the truth of the expression, existence is resistance, as regards the Palestinians who live in H2. While my visit was largely unstructured, I did meet Badi Dwight of the Palestinian Human Rights Defenders. This group of volunteers are committed to nonviolent resistance and documenting human rights abuses and breaches of international law by the soldiers and settlers. Badi confirmed that Palestinians in H2 are denied basic human rights and freedom of movement, and that extrajudicial killings are not uncommon. The volunteers also work with international volunteers, such as the Evangelical Accompaniment Program. Projects in the H2 area include providing counseling and training for women, activities for children, and training residents to use video cameras so they can film settler and soldier abuse. An invitation to attend a going away event for members of the EA team allowed me to see how much Palestinians in H1 appreciate the presence of foreign volunteers. Hebron is bleak, dystopian, and if the Israelis continue to have their way, the future looks bleaker and full of despair. The more I absorbed the reality of H2, the more I was humbled by the resolve of Badi and his colleagues and the people of H2 who continue their resistance. In closing, the Samud of the Palestinian people seems alive in the West Bank. They're not backing down. As one man told me, we're either going to be on the ground or under it. But this resolve is maintained at a very high cost of violent deaths, casualties, collective punishment, imprisonments, and the resulting trauma. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks for that quick overview. We'll get a chance to drill down and ask some more questions later, but I'm now going to turn to Michael to talk to us a bit about the whole set of meetings we had in Ramallah, which is very much related to what Philip has just been talking about. Would the secretary put up the next slide, please? And Michael, and you can tell us about this part.
Great, thanks. So one of the key priorities for me in this trip was connecting with human rights organizations who have been under attack by the Israeli government. And many people may be familiar with this, but just over a year ago, the Israeli government designated a series of leading Palestinian human rights groups as terrorist organizations in an attempt to try to shut them down. So these include groups like Defense for Children International Palestine, Adamir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association, Al-Haq, and a number of other organizations who are some of the really on the front lines of doing human rights work. So a couple of things about these designations is that the basic claim is that they're trying to say that these human rights groups are actually working as a front for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and that therefore they're actually terrorist organizations undertaking terrorist activity. The problem, of course, is that there's no evidence for this. The organizations themselves have not been presented with any evidence, and so they cannot challenge it. The claims are based on supposedly secret evidence that they have been shopping to governments around the world to try to get them on side. But in the few times that those reports have been leaked to the press, they've been found to be completely lacking any credibility, anything that would justify shutting down these organizations. And in the more recently this year, you had 10 European governments come out and say that the allegations against these groups are not credible and that they're going to continue working with these organizations. We also saw the US also express skepticism, and the CIA even said that they haven't seen any credible evidence on this. So there's been sort of this big movement. Basically, no one in the world except for the Israeli government recognizes these groups as terrorists. So there's a few things to say about this. One is that the Canadian government's response has been, unlike European countries, has been quite muted. In fact, to this day, the Canadian government has not put out a position on this. They have not expressed an opinion either on sort of the legitimacy of Israel's attacks, nor in support of these specific organizations. And so really puts Canada out there as really lagging on the international stage. The other thing is that the impacts of these terrorism designations is incredibly serious. It basically bans them, it criminalizes them. It makes it so that at any time the Israeli government could choose to close down their offices, arrest their staff, prosecute their staff, put them to jail for what they would say terrorist activity, which would amount to working for one of these human rights organizations. Under the legislation, counterterrorism legislation in Israel, even just like supporters in Israel, if they express support for the activities of DCIP, for example, they could be prosecuted for that. And, you know, just generally speaking, when someone is deemed to be a terrorist, you can really get away with anything against them, right? There's no, like, you lose sort of interest in human rights or due process. Those things kind of get waved away. And so really, the lives of the people who work at these organizations are really on the line. And only 2 months before we got there, their offices had been raided by the Israeli military, who confiscated equipment, really trashed the place, and welded their doors shut to prevent them from getting back in. Yet they continue to do their work. And so it's really incredible how they continue to refuse to be, I guess, forced into silence.
I think you have a
And
slide on that, don't you, Michael?
yeah, actually, why don't we go to the next slide, if you don't mind. Here, hopefully this is visible to people, but these are the doors to the Defense for Children International Palestine office and the Adamir office. You can see the significant damage is still very much evident. Damage both from Israel welding their door shut and from these organizations forcing these doors open so that they can get back in and they can continue to work. Really incredible. And so often where we met them was either across the hallway from these doors that had been raided or immediately above them upstairs. Maybe let's go back to the last slide, though, if you don't mind. So that's a few things about the general situation and why it was so important for us to go and meet with them. So we were lucky to meet with 2 of the 6 organizations. We could have met more, but we didn't have time. But this gave us sort of a sense of what was going on. They all, face fairly similar challenges. So for Defense for Children International Palestine, we met with Khaled Kumar, the general director, and Ayed Abu Aktaish, the accountability program director. You can see the photo of us with them on the left there. DCIP, people might be familiar with this organization. They are a children's rights group. They were founded in 1991. They advocate for the rights of children under occupation. That includes monitoring the safety of children. For example, if a child is killed by a military raid, they will go and they'll document that information and report about it, which is really critical work. They also provide assistance to children who find themselves in Israel's military court system, often they're there without any charges or trial, no access to a lawyer or their parents. And so this is very important work that they do. At Amir, we met with Zahar Francis, which is the organization's general director, and Milena Ansari, who's the international advocacy officer. And they also do work not with children, but with political prisoners in general, and again, working on issues related to administrative detention, where people are in the court system without charges, no evidence against them, no trial, but can be in prison for, let's say, 6 months, and then that can be renewed based on who knows what grounds. And so really in a lawless situation. So both organizations spoke about the difficulties that these terrorism designations have caused for their work. Obviously, you can imagine that this creates an enormous amount of stress, working under conditions where you're already under a military occupation, but now you could be arrested and prosecuted for doing your work at any time. So people are particularly worried about, for example, going through the Kalandia checkpoint on their way to East Jerusalem. That could be an opportunity for them to get picked up. They talk about the designations as really nothing else but an attempt to shut down their connection with the outside world, to shut down solidarity of the kind that we were doing with them, to try to make donors around the world maybe feel less confident about providing money. Maybe they don't want to deal with this, and so they say, okay, we're not going to donate to this organization anymore. So that's sort of the overall purpose of these designations. And they also talked about how, the designation, as mentioned, is based on secret evidence, so they can't challenge it. And similarly, because they're now deemed terrorist groups, they don't have any legal means to challenge, for example, Israel's raid against their offices. They can't use legal means to get back the equipment that was confiscated, stolen from them, because they don't have any legal standing to do so. Adamir too, one of the effects of this was that the lawyers who are working with Adamir, with political prisoners, they say that they're sort of concealing, they're working as individuals and not talking about the connection that they have to Adamir, again, so that they're able to continue to do their work. I mean, even DCIP, their ability, like they're representing children in this military court system, they could lose their access to children. They could lose that ability to provide that kind of legal aid because of these designations. So I guess maybe just finally on this point, it's worth noting that both organizations confirmed our suspicions that Canada basically has been absent on this. As mentioned, Canada hasn't put out a statement affirming a position on Israel's terrorism designations against them. And, we've noticed, for example, in August when the raids happened, immediately following that, there were a number of diplomatic offices, think like maybe 13 to 20 countries, who went to the offices of Al-Haq and the other organizations to show support and in a show of solidarity, to just show outrage at what the Israeli government had done. In the photos, and everything that was circulating, Canada wasn't part of that. And that was sort of a general trend. Canada just is nowhere to be found. And both organizations confirmed this, that they weren't aware of Canada's presence at any of the briefings that they were invited to, that a lot of countries had reached out, but the US and Canada were the two that had not done so. They weren't aware of any statements of support at any level, and that Canada just hadn't reached out to them at all about this, which really is shameful. As a Canadian citizen, I find that quite shameful that this horrible persecution of human rights defenders is taking place. Canada absolutely refuses to get involved. I should probably also say that one of the secondary effects of this terrorism designation, as mentioned, is about trying to stop people from visiting these organizations or showing solidarity with them. And my own experience is that on the way out of the airport, as I was trying to leave the country, my passport was flagged at passport control. And a security agent came and asked me questions and accused me of meeting with the PFLP, of meeting with terrorists, essentially, which I believe is because of my meetings with DCIP and Adamir, which, as mentioned, Israel falsely claims to be fronts for the PFLP, and gave me a warning that meeting with the PFLP could affect my access to Israel. So obviously this is a threat against, myself, but anyone who wants to meet with the leading human rights groups in Palestine. And, although I'm not aware of any significant action being taken against supporters to the state, it could happen at any time. So we really do need the Canadian government to do something. And that was the key message that we took away from this, is that if they had a message for the Canadian government, it's that they need to demand that Israel reject, that it revoke the terrorism designations. Countries like Canada could just pretend that the designations don't exist, they don't recognize them, but that's not enough, because doing so basically maintains the risk that at any point people could still be arrested at any time. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the other meeting that I'll touch on briefly is we met with David De Silva, who is the new representative of Canada to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. I think he had started about 2 weeks in this position before we had a meeting with him, so he was very new. However, overall, I'd say it was a fairly useful meeting to have, even if we didn't get a lot of satisfactory answers. Our top priority, as mentioned, was to relay to them the feedback that we heard from the targeted Palestinian NGOs in terms of the severe threats that they faced, and also their disappointment with the Canadian government's response. Unfortunately, we didn't get any clarity on the matter. Canada still was unable to say where they stand on the issue of the 6 organizations, although they did confirm that Canada does not consider, or I guess they said that Canada has not listed them as terrorist groups, which it doesn't really say that much about how convincing they find Israel's allegations to be. I think, like personally, I feel that De Silva wanted us to come away with the impression that Canada was bringing this up behind the scenes and maybe pressuring the Israeli government on this, but he never actually said anything to confirm that. Again, that the Canadian government even has an opinion on the matter. And overall, he explained, I guess, Canada's what Canada's theory of change is. Because for us, we would like to see the Canadian government bringing up these issues publicly all the time. From his perspective, or rather the Canadian government's perspective, they say that, you know, they have this close friendship with Israel. It's better for them not to be out there vocalizing these concerns, but use the relationship behind the scenes to bring this up privately, and that they can bring these issues up in a one-on-one way that other countries that are more vocal don't have that same access. So that's sort of how they try to assure us that it's fine that Canada hasn't said anything about this. Of course, the major problem with that is that effectively means Canada doesn't have a public position either on this issue or many other important human rights issues. And of course, because it's all behind the scenes, there's no evidence of what Canada thinks about an issue or what it's saying to the Israelis or what effect that has had. So it's asking us to trust them that they're doing and saying the right things, but there's nothing for us to hold on to, no reason for us to trust them. This is the main issue. And then finally, the issue that we touched on, the second most important issue that we brought up in that meeting was Canada's response to the reports on apartheid. Philip also already mentioned the reports by Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem. There have been reports by UN experts. It's becoming a consensus within the human rights sector on the ground, especially among Palestinian organizations, but also there's maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen Israeli human rights NGOs who are talking, maybe either who have endorsed the apartheid language or say that it's a legitimate topic to discuss. And Canada has rejected all of these findings out of hand without providing any rationale. So we had this opportunity to talk to them, and we asked them to provide something. Why did you reject these reports, in particular the Amnesty report? And still, after much pressing, they were unable to offer us anything, not a single reason or rationale justification for out of hand dismissing the findings of the entire human rights sector. So that is, again, very disappointing. And we emphasized to them that they'll have to engage with this reality eventually, as it is not going away, but it's becoming only a deeper consensus. They have to respond to this at some point. I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to maybe leave it here and pass it back to Peter. But
Michael, there's just one thing about our meetings in Ramallah you didn't touch on. You might want to mention, someone asked in the question and answer about the BDS, meeting with the BNC of the BDS movement. Do you want to say a word about that?
Sure, yeah. We had a good meeting with people in leadership positions with the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, or the BDS National Committee, which is a group that represents different sectors of Palestinian civil society, and represents quite a broad swath of civil society, and organizes the International Boycott Campaign. as well as the leadership of PACB, which is the academic cultural boycott. And so it was great to talk to them about the need to continue to build connections between what they're doing and what Canadian activists are doing. My organization supports BDS and has been involved in advocating for various BDS campaigns. Recently we were calling for a boycott of Pillsbury products because they had a factory operating in an illegal settlement in East Jerusalem. And so that kind of thing. And we just learned about how deep support for those kinds of tactics is, how popular that is at the level of Palestinian civil society, how many different sectors of society have bought onto that and are part of the movement. And so I guess reaffirm that this is a good strategy that we should be taking. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to that.
That's probably enough for the moment, Michael. Thank you. I'll preserve your voice for the Q&A later on if we can. So thank you, Michael. And I'm going to go to the third part now in the next slide, please. I've decided to tackle the issue about what Palestinians call 48 Palestine, or the state of Israel itself. And you'll remember, and has been mentioned before, that there have been three major major human rights reports that have come out, two from international organizations, one from an Israeli organization called B'Tselem, which basically claim that Israel practices apartheid not just in the West Bank, which is what Jimmy Carter was talking about, but everywhere. And so we were one of our objectives, we spent about half our time on the trip inside 48 Palestine, trying to see whether or not this allegation had substance, whether we found evidence for it. And to do that, I just thought it was useful just to review, according to the Rome Statute, the crime of apartheid consists of three elements. One is an intent to maintain a system of domination by one racial group over another, by systematic oppression of one racial group over another, and or one or more inhumane acts as defined or carried out on a widespread or systematic basis. Next slide. Among the inhumane acts that are listed in the Rome Statute are forcible transfer, expropriation of landed property, creation of separate reserves and ghettos, the denial of the right to leave and return, and the right to a nationality. Now, when we traveled there in 2022, we did not see any forcible transfer. So we cannot say that that took place, although most of us have read about the Nakba. There isn't much discussion about whether or not 750,000 Palestinians were expelled or forced to leave from what is now the state of Israel. We did not see any expropriation of landed property, although we did in the Negev see the effects of continued attempts to drive El Araqib into the ground and take over that property for the JNF. I'll just skip the next two and then we'll come back to the creation of separate reserves. We didn't see the denial of the right to leave and return to their country, although we know that that in fact is the case, though that's not that. Here's an example from this picture you see there, this Jewish woman from Austin, Texas, saying she could be moved to Israel and would be paid by the state of Israel to move there, where he's from Palestine. He cannot return to his land because he's not Jewish. But that's not something that we saw, that's something that we know about. But I do think that we saw a fair amount around the middle question there of the creation of separate reserves and ghettos. Would you take the next slide, please? If you look at the map here, all those green dots are Palestinian towns. Israel calls them Arab towns, or Arab Israelis or Palestinians. Most of the Palestinians call themselves Palestinians. They're the remnants of the people who did not flee in 1947-48. But there are 163 of these towns spread across Israel. We visited 4 of them. In fact, we stayed several nights in al-Fahim. We visited Nazareth. We also visited Kufr Qasim. I'll come back to talk about Kufr Qasim in a minute. Kufr Qasim is where that demonstration is annually about the people who were massacred in 1956. And we took a drive through Rahat, which is a major Arab town, Palestinian town, a Bedouin town, where Israel is trying to congregate Bedouins, moving them off the land in the Negev and relocating them in this town of Rahat. As we visited these places, we spoke with teachers and school principals. We spoke with activists. We also spoke with anybody else we could get our hands on. So we talked to school principals, students, lawyers, politicians, businessmen. Oh, and in addition, I think either Philip or Michael mentioned this, we also visited a number of destroyed Palestinian villages, including Lajun and Tantura, and we visited one unrecognized Bedouin village. Next slide. Now, actually, I'm going to go back to the slide we just had. I think it's important. If you wouldn't mind going back. It's really important that everybody understand what I mean when I say there are 163 Arab towns. I don't mean towns where there are lots of Arabs, although that's true, there are lots of. I mean, Israel legally designates towns as Jewish towns or as Arab towns. That's a legal definition. And the Arab towns have a perimeter that is defined by Israel. They cannot expand out beyond that perimeter. So basically, take a town like Kufr Qasim, or even the town al-Fahim that we've stayed in for several nights. The only people who live there are Palestinian citizens of Israel, or Israel calls them Arab Israelis. No Jews live there. Nearby, there are Jewish towns where no Palestinians can live. Now that has huge consequences. It's a separation of the population on a very large scale. Next slide. So one of the crimes of apartheid is separation and discrimination by one group over another. Now in Israel, Jews and non-Jews are separate, but they're not equal. You remember separate but equal was one of the slogans of the white racists in the United States. The Arab towns, delimited and geographically and legally defined, have poor services. They have higher unemployment, lower incomes. They cannot expand. Their educational system is poor, and the Arab students or Palestinian students drop out of high school much more. They have poor educational outcomes. Out of 33 official hospitals in the country, in Israel, 0 hospitals are in Arab cities or towns. Israel has over 60 train stations on 15 lines. None of them serve Arab cities. So the Arab towns are very similar to reserves or to ghettos. Actually, they're not like reserves in the sense that in an indigenous reserve, an indigenous person in Canada can leave and move into the city and live anywhere he or she wants to in the rest of Canada. That's not true in Israel. There are very limited areas where Palestinians can take up residence. But this is a picture here for this October 29th demonstration we went to for this annual demonstration for a massacre that took place at Kufr Qasim in 1956. These are all Palestinians demonstrating inside the state of Israel. Next slide. Now, this is a map. You see on the left-hand side, you see a yellow line going up and down. That's Highway 6. It's the major 4-lane highway that goes from southern Israel up to Haifa. Across it, going east to west, is Highway 5. That cuts across from Israel into the West Bank. But it also divides 2 towns, one from the other. On the north, above the line, is a Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel town called Kufr Qasim. And just south of it is a town called Rosh Hain, which is a Jewish town. Because of that 4-lane divided highway, there's basically no interaction between the two, no bus services that go back and forth. In the school in the town in the top, there are Arab schools. In the town in the bottom, there are Jewish schools. In the town in the top, there's no municipal library. There's no swimming pool. There's no cultural center. I think there is now one irrigated park. A lot of the roads are not unpaved, and there's no industrial park. Where Rosh Hain has all those. Now, how does that happen? It happens because Israel is a Jewish state, and Jewish towns are eligible for subsidies. So they get subsidies for a library, for a swimming pool, a cultural center, and so on and so forth, because it's a Jewish state and it's a Jewish town, and that's their objective, is to promote services for Israel's Jews. Next slide. This also can be seen in education, and we heard quite a bit. We talked to a number of high school students. The education system is separate, it's different, but it's not equal. Schooling in Israel is almost completely segregated. There are a few experimental schools that have been going on for several years where Jews and Arabs are in school together, but they're very rare. The Arab schools are poor quality and they're underfunded. They have a much higher dropout rate. And the curriculum is dictated by the state of Israel. So we heard, for example, kids tell us that if they want to get their graduation exam, when they get asked questions about the history of Israel, they know what the right answers are. If they don't give the right answers, that is to say the right answers by virtue of the Israeli or Zionist narrative, they won't pass. So they have to write down things that they don't believe is true. One of the ways around this is that Arab parents who have enough money, for example, doctors or lawyers or whatever, send their kids to private school. And that was a situation in the town that we were staying in. But even if they want to go to university, there's no Arab language university in Israel. Now just think about that for a second. 20% of the population of Israel speaks Arabic, a bit like the 20% of Canadians who have first language of French. But there's no Arab language university in Israel. If students want to study in their native language, they have to go to the West Bank, or they have to go to Jordan or somewhere else. Now just imagine the situation in Canada if we were to say there'll be no French language universities in Canada. Imagine how that would go down. Next slide. Okay, so you can go back to the earlier one. I forgot if there was not another slide. My point here, my summary here about the issue of apartheid inside Israel is that I don't think that we can make, based on our trip, we can't make conclusive evidence. We know that these other organizations, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, and Human Rights Watch, have done much more thorough investigation, and that's what they claim. But I'll say that all the stuff that we saw in Israel, saw in 48 Palestine, seemed to go along with and completely support that allegation. So now we can go to the last slide, and we will do questions and answers. And I'm going to start off with the first question. Put your questions, by the way, in the Q&A box, not in the chat. And Murray Rubin asks, who's most responsible for not having peace negotiations now, Arabs or Jews? So, Michael, would you like to tackle that one?
I mean, I don't know. That's a bit of a tricky question. I think obviously there haven't been peace negotiations since 2012, 2014. When there were active peace negotiations, it didn't get very far. The Oslo process, for example, basically locked in the occupation and didn't settle the key issues like refugees, status of Jerusalem, and the creation of the Palestinian Authority was supposed to be a temporary 5-year process transitioning to a final Palestinian state. And we're in what year? Almost year 30 of that. So I think people would, I don't know if the framing of peace negotiations is necessarily the most useful one. I think when we think of peace negotiations, it suggests that there are two countries at war and there are negotiations to get them to agree on some sort of compromise to stop. But what's happening, it doesn't really feel like a war, but an ongoing process of consolidating Israel's control over the land and people. And so that's not something that like a ceasefire won't fix that. What will fix that, right, is not talks for peace, but will fix that is a talk for a transition to democracy, more along, I think, sort of South African lines. That wasn't peace negotiations that brought an end to apartheid. It was anti-apartheid. It was talking about democracy in the future. Maybe I'm sidestepping this question and not answering it the way they were thinking, but I think that obviously there are hostilities all the time. Almost every single day there's a Palestinian killed, but it's not a regular conflict that can and there needs to be far greater action towards giving up control over land rather than just ceasing hostilities.
Thanks. Thank you, Michael. Susan Starkman asked a question about the situation of Christians, whether we learned anything about that. Philip, since you're from a Christian-related organization, maybe you'd like to tackle this. Did you learn about the situation of Christians?
Well, the Christian community has been getting smaller and smaller, from what I understand, in the West Bank, especially, and East Jerusalem, largely due to people leaving because they want a better life and they don't feel they're going to get it in the West Bank. One interesting thing that a Christian did tell us was that when it comes to the resistance, the Palestinians are united, and it's not a matter of being Christian. There's no divide between Christians and Muslims. Christians understand that they are a minority group within the greater Palestinian population, but they also are very much united. For example, they unite behind the symbolism of the Al-Aqsa Mosque as being, central to the Palestinian struggle. So, I don't think it's a big issue. The main focus for every Palestinian is just resisting the Israeli oppression and occupation. And religion doesn't play a very big part in that.
Thank you, Philip. The next one from Felix. I'm going to focus on questions where our trip brought something useful to bear to the conversation. It's a general question about social justice activism rather than a question about what we found on our trip. So if you don't mind, Felix, I will skip over that one. Hani Hassan. That's more of a statement rather than a question. You're okay. Felix, you ask, why not refer to Israeli violence as Zionist terrorism? When was the term illegal dropped from the settlers? I'm not sure it's been dropped from this. Maybe someone in the presentation didn't refer to illegal settlers, but not sure that we. I think you could refer to Israeli violence as Zionist terrorism. I guess you could do that. That would be fine. So back again, Murray Rubin, another one. You ask, you say you're a supporter of Israel, which is fine. I've picked that up from before. And the picture of the West Bank is terrible. I think the situation inside 48 Palestine or Israel was not very nice either. But why don't the Palestinians want to talk to the world about this in negotiations for peace? I think the Palestinians are trying as much as they can to talk to the world about this. I think that it's very hard to do so. So I don't think the Palestinians, they certainly were willing to talk to us and willing to talk to journalists and so on. So I think they do want to talk to the world about the situation. That's my experience.
Can I say something, Peter?
Sure.
About the negotiations, I think what's, and you touched on this, Peter, is that these are not equal groups negotiating. When you talk about negotiations, you've got basically the prisoners and the jailers, and you're asking the prisoners to negotiate for fundamental human rights, which they don't have. So there's this huge power imbalance. And my first visit to Hebron, I met an activist there, and we were talking, and he said, give me my rights, and then I will negotiate. And the Palestinians have no rights. They have no human rights. They have nothing. And yet, so how can they reasonably be expected to negotiate with their jailers? And Nelson Mandela brought up the same point. He said prisoners cannot negotiate with their jailers. So I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind when we talk about peace negotiations. They need to be on an equal level between free people.
Maybe I could just ask our secretary to stop screen sharing so we can see the faces while we're into the hearing these questions. That's great. Thank you very much. Felix asked whether this presentation was made available to the NDP. Not yet. You guys are first to hear it. But if you know an NDP member, or for that matter, a Liberal member, and you want to share it with them, this will be recorded and be available to everybody on this call. So please do feel ready to share it. Tina, I think your statement is more of an emotional statement, but it's why are they not designated terror? I'm not sure how to answer this one so you ask, so what if these organizations are working for the PFLP? I don't think we have any information that we can usefully bring to bear on that. We did meet with, does Canada supply military aid to Israel as the US? My understanding, and others may have a different view, is that we do not supply military aid to Israel like the United States does. The United States has a budget, a line item of $3.5 billion a year. I think it was actually President Obama who agreed to $35 billion over 10 years, I believe is what it was. But we do provide police, and we provide some Canadian military who basically are there to support the PA, the Palestinian Authority. We learned a little bit about this when we were, and they are under American direction and control. So we learned a little bit about this when we were in Ramallah. So if you think the PA is a good thing, then you would say this is good support for the Palestinians. If on the other hand, as some people do, if you see the PA as basically today more interested in protecting Israel than protecting Palestinians, then you would not think that's a good thing. That's, I guess it depends on what we don't have information from our trip. Philip or Michael, do you want to say something about this?
Well, I'll add that in addition to that, Canada does approve arms exports to Israel. I don't know if they ever deny requests to come across their desk. And it's the trend. I can't remember the exact number. I believe it was around $26 million last year in goods, military goods that were transferred to Israel from Canada. And that's a trend that has been accelerating over the past decade.
Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, those are sales. That's not directly aid. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay, all right. Marta, once again, Marta, you're asking a question there that our trip didn't really equip us to answer, whether Canada has oversight by law or statute with the disposition of the aid it supplies to foreign countries. I assume so, but how well it's applied and what those rules are, I don't know. We didn't investigate that. Steve Davis asked, what sources do you use to learn what's happening on the ground in Palestine? Is Al Jazeera reliable? What source do you recommend to an ordinary person like me? Philip, you want to take a first crack, and then I'll ask Michael to make a suggestion too.
Al Jazeera is certainly, I think, worth following. They present perspectives and drill deeper on a lot of issues that Western mainstream media won't. I use a variety of sources. Some mainstream media, like The Guardian in the UK, offers good background from time to time. And I use various feeds from people on the ground. You've got Palestinian perspectives, the Middle East Eye, the 972, the electronic Intifada. Sorry.
Intifada.
Thank you, Intifada. And I think that's what I would offer. Michael probably has a lot more.
I agree that I think Middle East Eye is a really good place to go. Them and 972 magazine, but that's more of a magazine, although they do some reporting, great reporting as well. But Middle East Eye, I find to be quite credible, and they often interview witnesses on the ground that, for example, Haaretz doesn't necessarily do as much of. So I definitely recommend Middle East Eye.
And I see Abigail Sala Metzger, and probably, excuse me for asking your name, mentions Mondowace. Mondowace is doing a terrific job of recording. They now have 4 people in Palestine. And I will, what I can do, rather than adding my own now, I'll add a couple in the follow-up email. I'll send everybody an email with this video, and I'll make some suggestions. So Steve, thank you for that comment. Murray, you're very active here. Murray Rubin, okay, you ask, as a supporter of Israel, what you're saying is horrible. Why doesn't the world know? Who would like to give a short answer to that?
I think
a middle-sized answer then. Okay.
I think increasingly people do know. I think media coverage is getting a lot better, and social media is helping with that. I think there are still in Canada a lot of barriers to good reporting on this. There are a lot of disincentives for journalists to write accurately about these issues. They face significant pressure from pro-Israel groups for quality reporting. And so I think, yeah, I think there are some barriers to good reporting in Canada, but generally speaking, it's easier to get information, good, credible information than it ever has been. So
Right.
I think it's slowly changing.
Anybody who wants to know, anybody who wants to learn can learn, and it doesn't cost them a thing. It's all out there if you look for it.
Arthur Milner asks if we got any indication of a nascent, broadly accepted Palestinian leadership. Is there any hope? I take that as being two different questions, but good questions. So who wants to talk? I'd like to say something on that, but Phil or Michael, you go first.
Well, one observation I feel is that people often say, where's the Palestinian leadership? Well, they're either in jail, they're dead, or they're exiled, a lot of them. Israel's very good at attacking and neutralizing, whatever term you want to use, Palestinian leadership and trying to fragment Israeli people. So I think that has to be recognized as an obstacle that the Palestinians have to deal with.
Michael?
I'll add, I mean, I think there are, outside of the PA, there are alternative sources of authority that are still contested. There's no replacement for the PA, it would seem. But for example, the BDS movement is a very wide network of Palestinians with very different political views who have nonetheless come together for this strategic campaign that has very specific goals that aren't necessarily political goals, but are human rights, international law focused goals. However, they don't take a position on what a political future looks like, whether that's a two-state solution or one-state solution. And we've heard some people criticize them for that. But then also inside Israel, in terms of Palestinian members of the Israeli Knesset, we talked to a lot of people who are supporters of Balad, which is a left-wing party that is seeking, its goal is to make Israel a state of all its citizens and to challenge apartheid through democratic elections. And there's lots of people we spoke to who supported them this time. I think there's some people who want them to take on a broader sort of mandate and to talk more broadly about a single democratic state. Of course, if they do that, they'll be kicked out of the Knesset because no political party is allowed to challenge the Jewish character of the state. But there were some talks about that, but we haven't. But that, I guess, would be another sort of political actor who is getting some attention at the moment. But I don't. It all just seems very fractured and fragmented right now. I don't know, Peter, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I think there's actually a contradiction in the question. I think there is nascent indications. There's certainly no broadly accepted leadership, as I can see. So whether those nascent developments, and I'll give one little example that Philip mentioned in the Lion's Den and the military resistance that's happening in Jenin and Nablus, there is a nascent unanimity that rejects the current Palestinian leadership. Whether or not that actually it's broadly accepted to the extent that when they have a funeral for one of these young kids who's killed, tens of thousands of people come out to it. So it's broadly accepted, but is that going to convert itself into a political movement? We don't know yet. I think the second part of your question is, was there any hope? I think the dominant mood I come away with from talking to Palestinians is frustration, anger, depression, but at the same time mixed with resolve and determination. So yeah, it's kind of the two at the same time. But I would be lying if I said I think that some movement is about to emerge around the corner that's going to move things forward. I don't think that's the case at all. Lita, we didn't really talk about Hamas at all, so I can't really deal with that. Roy Culpeper, Roy is well known from development days, and Roy asks whether we think there is a pro-Israeli or Palestinian bias in our media. And I'd like Philip and Michael to both comment on that, because I think it's not, well, you comment and then I'll make a comment afterwards. Philip?
I feel there's a pro-Israeli bias overall, if I had to choose, in the sense that so little is reported that the bias is reflected in silence. There's so little reporting on it. So most of the people I meet really haven't got a clue what's going on in that area, Canadians. And one of the reasons is that it's not in the media. So I think
that's not the same thing as bias. That just shows that the whole issue isn't being talked about.
Well, there's a bias in the sense that the gatekeepers are saying, what are we going to report on and what aren't we? And they, deciding consistently not to report on it.
I would say an example of that one, Philip, is the fact that there was hardly any press coverage of these 3 reports that said Israel is committing apartheid. So that's, they don't have to comment, they just have to not report on it to be biased.
That's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, they have a flashlight, and where they choose to shine that flashlight, that demonstrates their bias. And that's about all I have to say on that. Michael?
Well, I think it's interesting because pro-Israel groups will complain about the media being biased against Israel, and it's too much in favor of the Palestinians, which seems very foreign to us. But I think it's because when they actually do try to cover the media, the reality is bias. The reality is of showing a situation of oppressor and oppressed, and of this difference in power, and it comes across as very much critical of Israel. I think even if it's not nearly enough, like obviously there are huge failures, but even just recognizing that, I think in the course of basic reporting, you'll end up having coverage that in some way criticizes Israel. However, I think that despite that, I do think that media is, generally speaking, very much full of pro-Israel biases. I think one way we can compare it would be to look at the media coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for example. In the case of Israel, if there's a military strike on a building in Gaza, you'll have what the people in Gaza are saying, and then all the reporting will be on what the Israeli military said. Oh, it was full of terrorists, guns or whatever, and they'll take that with such authority and credibility and weigh that against testimonies of people who were killed. In the case of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I find that the media doesn't give any credence, any benefit of the doubt to the Russian military's line on these things. If they bomb a building full of people, no one cares what the Russian military has to say about it. And so I think that shows some kind of a double standard in how, it's just our media treats the Israeli line, the official line from the government, with such deference that is just undeserved.
I think a specific thing that one of our listeners here mentioned in the chat is that the CBC, it's well known, CBC is forbidden from referring to the term Palestine. So those kind of guidelines seem pretty weird.
We're going to have just time for one more question here before we move into our wrap up. I'm going to skip over a couple that are not particularly aimed at our trip. There's an interesting question that's raised by an anonymous attendee asking whether any of the Palestinians we met said they wanted to become Israeli citizens. And he or she clarifies that, saying the ones in the West Bank. I would say, and maybe Philip or Michael can certainly chime in here. First of all, no, I didn't meet anybody who said that they wanted to become Israeli. But I do know that in East Jerusalem, Israel offers Israeli citizenship to citizens of East Jerusalem. And with Israeli citizenship, of course, comes quite a significant number of advantages. For example, you can fly out of Ben Gurion Airport, or you can get better schools. You can have you get better treatment in all kinds of different ways if you're an Israeli citizen. And every year there are a small number of Palestinian citizens of East Jerusalem who do become citizens of Israel. I don't have the numbers; they're searchable. But out of the 350,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, the numbers would be, I think you could count them on one hand or maybe two hands. It's very small. So some people decide, most Palestinian citizens of East Jerusalem will say, we didn't immigrate to Israel. We don't want to be Israeli citizens. We want to be Palestinians. But a couple will cede to the advantages that are offered to them. In the same way, you also have, for example, occasionally a certain number of Palestinians that will decide, Palestinian citizens of Israel, who would agree to join the Israeli army. Because if you join the army, you get better jobs, you get all kinds of advantages that you don't get as someone who has not joined the army. So it's not true that you could cut it with a knife. There are people moving back and forth. In fact, I'll give one last little anecdote. A family that I stayed with, there are 8 sons and daughters. On the one end, there was one son who was so angry that his father wanted him to move out of Israel because he was afraid that he would eventually be shot or killed by the Israelis because he was a militant. And on the other end, one of his daughters married a Palestinian man who was very proud that he could learn Hebrew so much that people wouldn't even know he was Palestinian. So people have a wide range of reactions to oppression. It's not all in one camp, but overwhelmingly, my impression is Palestinians see themselves as Palestinians. They don't want to become Israelis, notwithstanding the fact that they would get a lot of benefits from doing so. I'm going to wind up there. I'm going to ask, maybe we can go to our last slide then, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to ask Michael and Philip to say a few words. Can you put us a last slide for a second? Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank the Ottawa Forum in Israel Palestine wants to thank its members and supporters who donated money for a trip. That was terrific. That made it possible. Without their support, this trip and this collaboration amongst OFIP, CJPME, and Anjapi wouldn't have been possible. Now we can go to the last slide. I just want to show the 3 organizations. What I didn't think of doing, but will do, is put our website links here so you can find out more information from that, including Michael Buchert has published a very good report of this trip available on the CGPME website, and we'll send links to that. So if you will now please end the screen sharing, our faces will come on, and I'll ask Michael and Philip if they have a few last words to say before we wind up today.
Maybe just briefly, thanks again to Peter and OFIP for bringing us together, both for the trip and for this meeting to debrief it in a public forum. Really a very enriching experience. It was my second trip to the region, and I always find it much deepens your understanding if you have a chance to go. But what I always say is that you don't need to go. Maybe this is contradictory. You don't need to go to see it to understand, right? There's so much written about it. There's so much good reporting. There's so much excellent writing about this that is available, that if you haven't gone, that doesn't mean that you don't have a right to talk about it, to have an opinion about it. I feel very strongly about that. At the same time, there is something about seeing it that just really deepens your understanding. Being able to go to the West Bank, and everywhere you turn, there are Israeli settlements, and understanding the implications of that really changes one's perspective. Being in Palestinian cities inside Israel, but along the Green Line, where they're allowed to cross the border, go 20 kilometers to Jenin, but their peers in Jenin aren't allowed to do the same the other direction. That has a very powerful effect. So Peter, if you do more tours in the future that are open to the public, I definitely encourage people on this call to get involved in those.
Thanks, Michael. That's very kind of you. Philip?
I think just a few sort of last impressions is that we talked to a lot of people about the future. I've had conversations and they varied greatly. But I think one common thread went through them is that many Palestinians are committed. They want, I'm speaking generally here, peace, and they want to live in peace. And however, the key thing that came up was that Zionism has to go, that the ideology of Zionism has no place in a democratic state for all its citizens, or two states, or whatever. And so that's sort of a key thought, that it's really the ideology of Zionism is what largely propels the horrors that are going on. And for there to be a just peace of any kind, a lasting one, the general consensus is that there's not much place for that ideology in any kind of state or states. The other thing is that when you go there and, we see the inequalities as a foreigner, and we get to walk away, there's always a sense of what might be compared to survivor guilt, in that we can go there and see all this and talk to people. And this is especially in the West Bank, and then we can leave. We get to leave. And Palestinians don't. They have to live it every day. And that sort of led to me a real renewed sense of admiration and respect for Palestinians who in a very principled way live their lives and resist how they can by keeping their dignity and having to put up with enormous injustice, humiliation, and those things. And each time I've gone, especially on this trip, it has really deepened my respect for them, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from the Palestinians.
Thanks, Philip. I'll just add one more word on that. Actually, pick up on something you said. You said that you talked about survivor guilt, and we get to come home and they get to stay. Although I have a little anecdote. I was in Gaza about 4 years ago, talking to, it turns out, a number of young women in a class. I was giving an English class to a number of young women. And I'd shown a little video of Canada, the mountains and stuff like that. And they were all very keen to visit Canada, and they wanted to visit Paris, and they wanted to visit Europe, and so on and so forth. And then I asked them, well, where would you like to live? And they all said, I want to live in Gaza. And that shook me. I mean, it's such a simple answer. So why would you want to live in Gaza? For me, Gaza is like prison or a terrible hellhole or whatever. Why would you want to live? Well, it's where my friends are. It's where my father is, where my family is, where my grandfather was born. They don't want to leave. They don't want to go, but they would like to live in a place that's decent. They're not living under oppression. They want to live there. So I'm sure I'm picking up on you, Philip. They have to stay there, but they want to stay there. But they want to stay there under conditions of equality and justice for all. And I'm sure that's what you meant.
Yeah.
With that, it's now 3:33 my time. I want to thank everybody for attending this. Thank you particularly to Philip and to Michael for participating today, for joining me as we went around our adventure trip around Israel Palestine. I want to thank Yasmin, our OFIP secretary, for putting together the slideshow. Thanks to all the OFIP donors who contributed money to this trip. And all I can say is onwards and upwards. Thank you very much. Have a great day.